I never imagined that sharing an apartment would change the course of my life. At first, it was practical, two people splitting rent in the city, nothing more. My roommate, Daniel, seemed like the kind of guy who kept to himself, quiet, focused on his graduate work, polite in that effortless way that made you trust him instantly. I told myself he was just another name on the lease, while my real life, my real love, existed outside these walls with Adrian, my boyfriend of 2 years. Adrian and I had a comfortable rhythm. He worked long hours, often traveling for projects, but when we were together, it felt safe. We had plans, or at least the kind couples draw loosely on the canvas of a shared future, maybe a place of our own, maybe a dog, maybe something more. I thought that stability was enough to keep temptation at bay. Daniel entered quietly into that routine, a presence that at first was background noise. We cooked in the same cramped kitchen, washed dishes side by side, and occasionally shared a late-night movie when neither of us wanted to be alone with our thoughts. Over time, though, I began to notice things I shouldn't have. His laugh lingered in my head long after it ended. His shoulders, broad and relaxed, seemed always in my line of sight. There was a calmness to him, an ease that contrasted sharply with the hurried pace of my life with Adrian. It wasn't love, at least that's what I told myself. But there was something unspoken simmering beneath our small interactions. When he brushed past me in the narrow hallway, my chest tightened. When his hand accidentally grazed mine while passing a plate, I found myself memorizing the sensation. These were small, almost invisible moments, but together they built a kind of tension I couldn't explain away. I wanted to believe that boundaries were still intact, that this was all harmless. Daniel, for his part, never acted overtly. Yet his eyes told a different story. They lingered too long when we sat across from each other at the kitchen table. They softened whenever I spoke about my frustrations with Adrian, as if he understood something deeper than the words I was saying. And sometimes I caught him studying me in silence, his expression unreadable but heavy with implication. One evening, after a particularly long day, Daniel suggested we open a bottle of wine. I didn't protest. We settled into the couch, the glow of the television more background than focus, and let the conversation wander. I found myself speaking freely about my doubts, about how Adrian's constant absence gnawed at me, about how I sometimes felt invisible in my own relationship. Daniel listened without judgment, his attention steady and comforting. By the time the bottle was nearly empty, the air between us had shifted. We were sitting closer than before, knees almost touching. His laughter came softer, his voice slower, as though each word was weighed before release. At one point, our eyes locked, and for a heartbeat too long, neither of us looked away. It was Daniel who leaned in first, though only slightly, as if testing the limits of the space we shared. My breath caught, my chest rising in betrayal of the calm expression I tried to hold. He stopped just short of me, his gaze flicking to my lips before retreating. A nervous laugh broke the silence, and he shifted back into the couch, leaving the moment suspended like a cord unresolved. I pretended it hadn't happened, but the truth was impossible to ignore. I had wanted him to close the gap. The thought haunted me as I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint creak of floorboards as Daniel moved about in his room. My body betrayed me with a restless energy, a quiet anticipation I refused to name. The next morning, everything appeared normal, coffee brewing, mugs clinking, casual conversation about errands. Yet, beneath the surface, something had changed. We had brushed against a boundary neither of us acknowledged, and in that silence, the possibility of more began to take root. I told myself I could handle it, that I could resist whatever temptation threatened to bloom. But the truth pressed against me in ways I couldn't ignore. I was drawn to Daniel, and if another moment like that arrived, I wasn't sure I'd have the strength to stop it. The days that followed carried a strange rhythm, as though Daniel and I were circling something invisible in the room. Conversations were shorter, touches more cautious, yet the silence between us was louder than ever. I tried to bury myself in routine, calls with Adrian, long hours at work, evenings spent pretending that the apartment was nothing more than walls and furniture. But Daniel was there, always there, his presence impossible to ignore. One Friday night, the tension finally broke. We had planned nothing elaborate, just another evening of movies after a week that had drained us both. Daniel ordered pizza. I brought home another bottle of wine, and soon we were sunk into the couch, a low hum of laughter filling the space. I told myself it was innocent, the same way it had been dozens of times before. Yet even as I laughed, I felt the pull, an invisible gravity, drawing me toward him. At some point, the movie faded into background noise. Daniel shifted closer, his thigh pressing lightly against mine, his arm draped casually over the back of the couch. I could feel the warmth of him, the subtle rise and fall of his breathing. My pulse quickened, betraying the calm mask I wore. Then came the moment I had both dreaded and longed for. He reached to grab the remote, leaning across me with an ease that felt anything but casual. His weight pressed against me, his face close enough that I could see the flecks of gold in his eyes. Time seemed to slow. My chest tightened, my breath caught, and for the span of a heartbeat, I considered moving away. But I didn't. Instead, I froze, caught between resistance and surrender. His hand hesitated on the cushion beside me, his gaze flicking from my eyes to my lips. And then he was there, on top of me, not in force, but in a way that made the world tilt sideways. My body should have resisted. My voice should have spoken Adrian's name like a lifeline, but I stayed silent. When his lips brushed mine, it was both a shock and an inevitability. A flood of guilt crashed into me, but so did something else. Hunger, raw and undeniable. My hands rose as if on their own, gripping his shoulders, pulling him closer. The kiss deepened, and with it came the shattering realization that a boundary had been crossed, one that could never be rebuilt. The rest unfolded with a reckless intensity one couldn't contain. The closeness I had imagined, the tension that had simmered for weeks, ignited all at once. Every touch carried the weight of secrecy, every breath tangled with both passion and betrayal. For a while, I forgot Adrian's name, forgot promises I had once sworn were unbreakable. All I knew was Daniel, his warmth, his insistence, the way he made me feel seen in a way I hadn't in months. When it was over, the silence was deafening. Daniel lay beside me, his breathing steady, his expression unreadable in the dim light. I turned onto my back, staring at the ceiling, my chest heaving with the gravity of what had just happened. The taste of him lingered, both intoxicating and damning. Neither of us spoke. Words would have made it real, and I wasn't ready for that. Instead, I closed my eyes, pretending that if I stayed quiet long enough, the night might erase itself. Morning came like a cruel reminder. Daniel moved through the kitchen, as though nothing had changed, his voice casual as he asked if I wanted coffee. I forced myself to respond, to act as though I wasn't replaying every moment in my mind. My phone buzzed on the counter, Adrian's name lighting up the screen with a simple message, "I miss you. Can I visit next weekend?" My stomach dropped. I typed a quick reply. Of course, I'd love that, but my fingers trembled on the keys. The words felt hollow, unworthy. Across the counter, Daniel's eyes flicked to the phone, then to me. He didn't say anything, but the look was enough. We both knew the truth now, and no amount of coffee or casual conversation could wash it away. I told myself it was just one night, a mistake born of weakness. But the way Daniel looked at me, steady and unflinching, told another story. Something had begun, and I didn't know if I had the strength or the will to stop it. Adrian's visit arrived faster than I was prepared for. In the days leading up to it, I tried to rebuild the fragile walls between Daniel and me, pretending that what had happened was a mistake locked in silence. But desire has a way of lingering, of staining every glance and gesture. Even when we said nothing, the memory of that night pulsed beneath the surface, an unspoken current we both felt. When Adrian finally walked through the apartment door, suitcase in hand, and his smile wide with relief, I felt my chest tighten. He embraced me, kissing me with a warmth I hadn't realized I had missed. For a moment, guilt nearly split me open. Behind him, Daniel stood in the doorway of his room, offering a polite nod, his expression calm but unreadable. The first night passed uneventfully, at least on the surface. Adrian and I cooked dinner while Daniel excused himself to his studies. We laughed over wine, reminisced about old trips, and for a while I convinced myself I could still salvage this. But every so often, I caught Daniel's gaze drifting from the shadows of the hallway, steady and unblinking, as though reminding me of a truth I wanted to bury. By the second day, the tension had become unbearable. Adrian suggested the three of us watch a film together, and though I forced a smile, the idea filled me with dread. We sat side by side on the couch, Adrian's hand resting over mine, Daniel only a few feet away. The closeness felt suffocating. When Adrian laughed and leaned against me, I saw Daniel's jaw tighten, his eyes flicker with something sharp. Adrian noticed. He wasn't blind, and though he said nothing at first, I could feel his suspicion sharpening with every shared glance between me and Daniel. Later that evening, when we were alone in my room, Adrian studied me with a look I hadn't seen in months, a look that searched past my words into the truth I was hiding. "Is there something you're not telling me?" he asked quietly, his hand still on mine, but his tone edged with fear. My throat tightened. Denial rose instantly, ready to shield me, but the weight of the secret pressed too heavily. Daniel's touch, his kiss, the memory of him on top of me. All of it clashed with Adrian's eyes, which still carried trust, still carried love. I couldn't answer. Silence betrayed me. Adrian's hand slipped from mine, his shoulders stiffening as realization bloomed in the space I couldn't fill with lies. "It's him, isn't it?" His voice broke, not in anger but in heartbreak. I wanted to reach for him, to explain, but what explanation could possibly soften betrayal? Tears pricked my eyes, and in that moment Daniel appeared in the doorway, drawn by the raised voices. His presence only deepened the wound. Adrian stood, trembling, his expression torn between fury and devastation. "I trusted you," he whispered, and the simplicity of those words shattered me more than any scream could have. He pushed past Daniel, grabbed his coat, and left the apartment without looking back. The sound of the door closing echoed like a verdict. Silence followed. Daniel lingered, his face pale, his posture rigid. "I didn't mean for it to happen like this," he murmured, but there was no apology in his tone, only a quiet certainty, as if some part of him believed this outcome was inevitable. I sat on the edge of the bed, numb, replaying the collapse of everything I had built with Adrian. My chest ached, not only with guilt, but with the sickening awareness that I had let it unravel, choice by choice, silence by silence. Daniel stepped closer, placing a hand on my shoulder. For a moment, I let it stay, the comfort familiar. But it wasn't enough. Nothing could undo the fracture that had opened. That night, as I lay awake in the dark, I realized the truth that would haunt me. I hadn't stopped Daniel, and in that surrender, I had lost more than just Adrian. I had lost the version of myself who believed he could remain faithful, who believed love alone could keep temptation at bay. The apartment felt colder after Adrian's departure, emptier despite Daniel's presence. Every room seemed to echo with what I had destroyed, and though Daniel remained steady as ever, I knew that the shadow of betrayal would never leave me. I didn't stop him, and that choice would follow me, quietly but relentlessly, for the rest of my life. The days after Adrian left blurred together, a haze of silence and guilt that seemed to coat the walls of the apartment. His absence was everywhere, his toothbrush still by the sink, his sweater draped across the back of a chair, the faint scent of his cologne clinging stubbornly to the air. Each item felt like an accusation, a reminder of the trust one had shattered. Daniel stayed, moving through the space with the same quiet composure he always carried, but something in him had shifted too. His presence was no longer just comforting, it was complicated, tangled with the wreckage of what had happened. He would knock gently on my door in the evenings, asking if I wanted dinner, if I needed company. Sometimes I said yes. Other times, I pretended to be asleep just to avoid the weight of his gaze. I told myself I had made a choice, But the truth was murkier. Daniel wasn't my partner, not in the way Adrian had been. He was here, yes, steady and unyielding, but his steadiness came with a quiet expectation that because Adrian was gone, I would naturally belong to him now. I wasn't sure if that was what I wanted, or if I even deserved the chance to want anything at all. At night, when sleep refused to come, I replayed the moment Adrian looked at me with such raw betrayal. His voice echoed in my head. I trusted you. It was a simple statement, but it carried the weight of everything I had destroyed. I wondered if he would ever forgive me, if time would soften the fracture, or if I had become nothing more than a cautionary tale in the story of his life. Daniel rarely spoke about that night, but his actions betrayed him. He lingered longer in the kitchen when I was there. His hand brushed mine more deliberately now, not accidental as before. Once, when I came home late from work, he had dinner waiting on the table. Candles lit, plates set, as if rehearsing a life we hadn't agreed upon. I ate quietly, grateful for the food, but unsettled by the intimacy. One evening, unable to bear the silence any longer, I asked him, "Do you regret it?" He paused, setting down his glass. "No," he said softly, his eyes locking onto mine. "I regret how it happened, but not that it happened." His answer left me hollow. I wanted regret, something to mirror the guilt tearing me apart. Instead, he gave me certainty as though what we had done was justified by the feelings he claimed to have. I didn't know whether to be comforted or terrified. Weeks passed, and the apartment grew heavier with unspoken words. Adrian's calls stopped entirely, his absence solidified into silence. I deleted our old photos from my phone, not because I wanted to forget, but because the sight of them made it impossible to breathe. Losing him felt like losing a part of myself I could never get back. Daniel remained patient but unyielding, as though waiting for me to finally accept the path we had taken. But every time I looked at him, I saw not just the man who had held me, but also the reason Adrian had walked out the door. Desire still lingered between us, sharp and undeniable. Yet it was laced with the bitter taste of betrayal. One night, as I lay awake staring at the ceiling, I realized something unsettling. The story wasn't over. What happened with Adrian was an ending, yes, but also a beginning of a life built on choices I hadn't fully claimed. I had stepped into a new chapter, one written not with certainty, but with the weight of consequences. I didn't know where it would lead, whether Daniel would remain or fade, whether Adrian's silence would someday give way to forgiveness or remain permanent. All I knew was that the person I had been before, the man who believed love was unbreakable, was gone. In his place stood someone else, someone who knew how quickly trust could fracture, how silence could destroy, how a single moment of weakness could ripple into a lifetime of echoes. And though Daniel was only a room away, the truth pressed down harder than ever. I was more alone now than I had ever been.